Hello, everyone. Welcome to our very special webcast. I'm super excited to see familiar faces, unfamiliar faces, and also be here with our lovely guests who are going to do most of the talking. So don't get used to my voice. This is the last time you're going to hear it. My name is Mariah. I am the Director of Programs at National Novel Writing Month. If you don't know what National Novel Writing Month is, we provide the tools, encouragement, and community to help people write novels, reach creative goals. We have two websites, one just for young adults and teachers, and we offer community writing challenges year-round, including our flagship National Novel Writing Month Challenge in November. And then I'm here with representatives from Novelly. Novelly is a nonprofit with a mission to get ebooks by underrepresented youth published and taught in the English classroom so that every student can feel seen and inspired by what they read in school. You can see links to all of the things I just mentioned in the description below the video, so please check it out more. It's really Novelly. We're super excited to work with you all because yeah, we love it. And I want to introduce our hosts because I'm just the meta host, and then I'm going to pass it off to our actual host. So, and the first host is Harnoor, she, her. Oh, my pronouns are she, her. I have them in my description, but also she, her. Is a high school senior from the Bay Area. She is passionate about the arts, climate change, and social justice. She proudly identifies as both Indian American and LGBTQ+. She's a founding member of her school's chapter of the Bay Area Student Activists and a graduate of Novelly's Speak Leadership Academy. She loves writing, indie music, art history, and trivia. In her free time, she likes to write short stories and go on walks. Yay! Our second host is Emdya, she, her, also referred to as Emdy or M, 16-year-old female in Florida who was born in Cuba. She adores the art of poetry and contemporary modern dance. In her free time, Emdya enjoys writing for several hours while drinking an iced caramel latte. Emdya also partakes in weightlifting and research on political and current events. She hopes to express positivity and kindness to all. She believes that the world would be a better place if we were all a little kinder to each other. She's passionate about access to effective education to all, STEM encouragement, and community service. Congrats on the excellent bios. I feel like I'm still struggling to try to capture myself in a little paragraph, and love hearing about what you're interested in. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to you to explain what we're going to be talking about today, how the hour will work. I'm going to be monitoring the YouTube chat. So if you're watching, feel free to drop in where you're watching from, what writing project you're working on. You can ask questions, comment. I'll pass those on to our hosts and our guests. If you have any questions for me, I'll pop up as NaNoWriMo in the chat so I can answer them there too. All right, enough from me, passing it on.
So hello, a few weeks ago, we had the opportunity to listen to other young writers, including Alyssa Zhao, Charlotte Young, David Chen, and Mira Zhang about their published stories in the Novelly library. And if you haven't checked out Novelly, there are published stories about inspiration and diversity, different perspectives, and you should definitely check out the previous episode that's on the NaNoWriMo YouTube channel. And today I'm joined with Harnoor and much more fabulous writers as well, including Maya Henry, Menna Williams, as well as Yuleni Gonzalez, who also have their stories published in the Novelly library. Maya Henry has For Those Who Have Forgotten to Speak, Menna Williams has The Untold History, Sea of Freedom, and Yuleni Gonzalez has When We Get There. And today we're going to be talking about the writing process and legacy. Before we start that, I'm going to introduce myself once more. My name is Emdya Pramuyoyo. My pronouns are she, her. I'm located in Miami, Florida. I attend Florida Virtual School as well as Miami-Dade College, and I am a junior. If you guys would like to introduce yourselves as well.
Yeah, I can get the ball rolling with my second introduction. My name is Harnoor. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently in the Bay Area, but I'm an incoming freshman at Reed College in Portland. And yeah, I've been a Novelly youth ambassador for a little while now, and it's been great fun and a great honor. And I'd like to open up to the authors to introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Mina. Sorry about that technical issues. I am just finished my second year at the University of Redlands. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and a small summary of my story is about a runaway slave who becomes a pirate to save other slaves. And yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Maya. I use she, they pronouns. I'm currently a junior in high school at Girls Academic Leadership Academy in Los Angeles, California. And my story is about Mario, who's the latest boy in a lengthy line of devout men. And it's about adolescence, how fragile it is, and how crushing it can become.
Hi everyone, I'm Elena Gonzalez. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm currently in Gainesville, Florida, studying at the University of Florida. And one quick little summary about my story would be it's about following the story of immigrants moving from Argentina to the United States and all their trials and tribulations that they've had to face along the way.
All right, thank you so much for those wonderful introductions. And yeah, and if anybody's interested in reading any of those stories, they're all available for free on the Novelly website, and they're all fantastic. I recommend them all. Very, very talented writers. But with introductions out of the way, I think we can get started with our first question. And I wanted to ask, what is the most helpful thing you've learned about your own writing and editing process?
For me, I would say the most important thing is that I have to give myself time. I have to carve it out. I think especially a lot of students can relate to the feeling of just feeling really, really guilty for taking time, whether it be to hang out with friends, read a book, write a story you're working on. When there's tests coming up, it's AP exam season in like a few weeks, and or even next week, and I'm feeling pressure like I should be doing a last cram, I should be taking notes, I should be doing a practice test. And when you're like trying to work on a story or you just really want to write, I think at least for me, like the first thing to go is writing, because I feel so guilty for not doing more academic things. And so I think what I've learned is that if I just give myself time and like make time, I will do it and I won't feel guilty and I'll have a lot of fun that way, and I won't cut it from my schedule. I remember it was last year I worked on this story with Novelly, and I did Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays 7 to 8, and that was like my writing time. And I met it. I didn't feel like I had to cut it out. I felt like I had made that time. I was like, it's okay, I can dedicate this hour 3 days a week to this. And that was just really helpful. It was like really great time to work and not feel bad about it. And I would also say something else I've learned, I think particularly about revising, is that like you can go at your own pace. I know some people write really clean first drafts, and that is not me. My first drafts are really messy, pretty bad, need a lot of in-depth editing. And so I think sometimes I'd hear like, oh, this person has already edited half their draft and I'm on chapter 1. And it's like, that's okay. Take your time. People work in different increments. Some people can sit down and edit for hours on end. Some people, they can only do it 20 minutes at a time. And like, it's going to get done at some point, whether it be in a week or a month or a year. And just, I think giving myself time to do that and like not feel stressed and go get a coffee, go hang out with a friend in between editing sessions. That's been really helpful for me.
Yeah, for me, I think something that I learned that was really important was that, especially with writing, that you don't always have to start where the story starts, right? So you can always start, I remember when I was writing my story, I found that starting, I didn't know how to start it, but I knew how to get the middle out of the way. So I would start at the middle and I would work towards the end and be like, okay, what needs to happen between the point where I chose to start and where actually started? And realizing that not every story happens linearly is really important. Not all stories have to start at the very beginning. And in terms of editing, I definitely find that sometimes I don't know exactly what I want a scene to look like, and I think just trying to realize, asking myself, what's the point of this scene? Is always really important in the writing process, because sometimes we write something and we go back later and we're like, why is that exactly there in the first place? Sometimes you see it and in retrospect with everything you've written afterwards, it kind of comes as like a surprise, like, wow, I really did write that. That doesn't belong there. It belongs somewhere else. So I think that's something to keep in mind your story's not going to come out perfectly the first time. You need to chop it up and rearrange it sometimes.
I'd say my writing process is similar to that of how I like write music. I just come up with an idea, write about it for like a little bit. If I no longer have ideas for that day, I like leave it alone for a while and then come back to it. But I have been trying this thing. I'm a writing tutor for the next batch of people at Novelly writing to like get their stories published, and I'm working with somebody who likes to write their stories not chronologically, and I decided to try that for one of the stories that I'm currently writing, and it's really fun just like writing like a random scene that pops into my head and not knowing where the heck it's going to end up in the story. Heck, it probably won't even end up being like part of the first book. It might be like a second book type issue, but like it's still really fun just like writing like random stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, and for any aspiring writers that are probably in the audience, listening from these individuals, we can see that a writing process can be anything that you make it to be. It doesn't have to be in a chronological order. You're going to have several errors the first draft. Something that I've heard several writers say is that your first draft will never be perfect. It's probably going to look awful and you're probably going to hate it. But that's the purpose of writing, is you continue and you start to fall in love with your own writing and your own voice, and you find your voice. And with that question, I would also like to ask you guys, what do you hope your legacy will be as a writer or an author? Lenny, if you'd like to respond.
Yeah, so I really find that I want to try to avoid telling the single story. I think whenever we hear in the media, we hear one story about one particular group, whether it's a racial group, ethnic group, religious group, we always see that story, and oftentimes we assume that that is the only thing that exists. And I think, especially with me, I like to tell stories about immigrants, about Hispanic people, and realizing that, there's not just one immigration story. People come here legally, illegally, by plane, boat, train, all kinds of things, and realizing how these things impact their experiences and how we interpret those experiences. It's just really important to understand that there's just not one story. There's so many different kinds of experiences and how people experience those things.
My legacy as an author. I haven't totally thought about that like question like deeply before, but like it would definitely just be like to inspire people who read whatever the story may be about. Like I usually don't write historical fiction. The story that I've written for Novelly is like the first historical fiction thing that I've written, and that was inspired by the Black Lives Matter protests that were happening during COVID. But like really it just it doesn't totally matter what the genre is, as long as it like encourages people to read, gets people interested in writing, and just being able to like spread like what ends up in my head to others.
I agree with what both of the other authors here have said, and I also think I would like to be remembered as someone who like got other people to write specifically about themselves. I think, at least for me, I started really like writing when I was like maybe like 11. That's when I really fell in love with it. And I'd say for the first like 3 years of that, I never wrote about myself. You would never see the word I in a story unless it was just first perspective. It was always, always, always about other people. But that's all. I mean, that was a really great tool where I started to put elements of like things that I had dealt with on other people. And that was a great building block. But I think I've gotten to a point where like what I wrote with Novelly was about me pretty much. And even in the bio of it, like I kind of took ownership of that. And I think that was something that it took a lot of time to get to, but being able to replace the U's with I's was really healing and really powerful. And it was really amazing people to like write my story and then have people read it and say like, okay, like we accept that this happened. We understand it. And I think especially when we're writing about stories or people are thinking about writing a story about sexual assault or eating disorders or family or mental illness, it's really important to have more testimonies And so I think that if nothing else, I would love to be remembered as someone who not only wrote their own story, but also helped other people feel comfortable enough replacing the yous with I's and getting their story out there, even though that's a really, really hard process.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think that's something that's really central to like the whole idea of novelty is like a lot of the time, we're told like this single story, right? Like this whole idea of like a literary canon and like the kinds of books that get published or that catch on in the industry, and sort of opposing that and making space for everybody's voice to be heard. So we're not just hearing one side of it. So yeah, like I really liked all of those responses. It really got to the heart of that. And obviously it's been a little while since you've published your story with Novelly. And so I was wondering, how do you feel like your style has changed after publishing? And, how do you feel like you've grown through the process of publishing with Novelly? And this is open to anyone. You can just go ahead and.
I would say I've cut back on the figurative language. I still love figurative language, but like 2 years ago when I was writing the story, it was like every other sentence was 3 lines long on a Google Doc, just verbose, like overflowing with sensory detail. And I mean, of course, I still really like reading that style of writing, but I think I've gotten a little bit better at like paring down on that and just choosing the most important images, because at a certain point it was like it would take you couldn't read the sentence. There was too much in there. So I'd say that.
Yeah, I think I found something really similar myself, in that I'm really valuing a lot more, I don't want to say simplistic, but really like cutting down stories until there's like not much left, but still being able to invoke the same emotions as if you had paragraphs on paragraphs. I think like a transition into flash fiction is what I've been looking at, and it's been really interesting. It's a constraint, but it's also, I don't know, powerful in a way, trying to say a lot with very few words. I think that's where I found a lot of effective writing these past few years.
I'd say that I've gotten really into writing more dialogue. There's always been like this like thing every school, like grade school, where they're just like, you can't write too much dialogue. Dialogue cannot be like an entire page. And now I'm just like, well, now I want more dialogue, and now you guys can't tell me anything because I'm in college. So, and then also a lot of my stories have been like one main character focused. So now I'm trying to like make it more multi-characters and like elaborating on other backstories besides one person. So
It's really nice to hear about the evolution of writing in general, especially from you guys who are talented and have published works on Novelly. And going back to Novelly and the stories you guys wrote, when I was reviewing all of your stories, something I saw was you guys addressed some sort of social change or other issue that ties into real world while also having your own voice. So I'm curious, how do you balance writing for yourself, but also writing to address social change? Anyone can take it.
I think it's really hard to separate the two in some ways, because whenever I feel like I'm writing for myself, I'm also writing about social change. I think, whenever I write, I've always find a way to write my characters as immigrants or Hispanic, and I think finding those intersections, not just with my personality, but with how those demographics interact with the world. I think, regardless of if I'm writing for myself, I am going to be writing about social change regardless.
I never really thought about it, but like going through my head, I've realized that I've like written a lot of stories where it's just like trying to take down like a social hierarchy or something like that. And it's just like very interesting to see that, like, I'm losing my train of thought. Found it. Just interesting to see that, like, there's like should be some sense of equality, not just like in the real world, but like just like when writing a story, like I'm just like there always has to be like we always have to find like an equal ground, and you can't have this like I'm better than you mentality type thing. So yeah.
I agree, and I also think that I'd say, and maybe I'll split it into two parts. I think part of it is oftentimes characters are so multifaceted that I think even if the story isn't a social change story, some aspect of their identity is going to be impacted by politics and the world. And I think ignoring that would be really hard to do. Not, I mean, disingenuous to the character, and also just like impossible to not mention it. And I also think that even in today's like modern society where books are being banned left and right for just containing characters that dare to like defy the norms, I think even just writing diverse, inclusive characters that have identities that we don't typically see in mass media, I think that is a way of like writing for social change, because those are novels and books and stories that generally aren't welcome in this country right now. So I'd say that's, yeah, it's a two-part thing.
Yeah, it seems like writing for social change is, like something that comes very naturally. Again, like if like as characters sort of contain an extension like of yourselves and of your ideas. And I think that's really interesting. And that can be seen in like many of your stories. It's just like through the act of creating such like wonderful, complex characters that are really like not shown up in literature stories that haven't been told. It is like political in and of itself. And actually kind of leading into the next question was, where do you think you get your biggest source of inspiration, and where do you pull ideas from? And this could be like, books or authors that inspire you, or also just sort of where you pull for, plot points or, like elements of your own story.
I'd say a lot of inspiration I get is like from movies a lot of the time. And surprisingly, just like listening to music, there's like I've realized that a lot of like the like personality that I get from characters is just listening to like a certain genre of music. I'm just like, this has a lot of character A personality, so now I'm going to write like character A is now like I don't like the classical music genre, and character B is now like rap and hip hop type thing. Like, so yeah, that's I find it weird kind of that like music is like one of like the bigger inspirations for writing. But yeah.
Yeah, I personally have found that just seeing the world around me, like just like observing things, and then suddenly I'll fixate on one thing, and then I can't stop thinking about it, and then I make a story out of it somehow. Like I remember the other day I was watching over the shoulder of my dad, he was watching a soccer game, and the camera panned over the face of one person, and his face, I can't describe it, but like I couldn't forget it, and I just had to write something about that because his expression, I don't know, told me something. And I'll do that with broken bottles I'll see in the street or something like that. Like just the smallest things. I think how can I make that interesting, I guess, and that's where I get a lot of my ideas.
Yeah, for sure. I also think that, at least for me, a lot of it comes from, because I'm a big reader. I really enjoy reading. And I find that oftentimes I'll get really mad at the author if I don't like the ending. Like The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai, one of my favorite books of all time. I hate the ending. I'm not going to spoil it, but like I reread it like quite a bit. And every single time I like have to prepare myself to read the last few chapters because I hate the ending and I don't think that's how the characters ended up. And I anyways, so sometimes if I'm reading a book like that or I'm watching a show and I'm like, that is not what the characters deserved, I am often at that point inspired to write a story where sometimes it even starts with like those characters have the same names as the book. And then over time it changes and it develops into its own. But like with The Great Believers, I wrote a story inspired by one of the characters that at the end is no longer alive, and I thought that person should have been alive. So I wrote a story about them as a kid, and their name was changed and their story was changed and all of that. But like oftentimes if I'm mad at something because I don't think that's how it should have gone, I write a story where my idea is the answer, essentially.
Yeah, and tying back to the inspiration, this is a pretty vague question, but I think it's something that a lot of writers deal with because I write a little bit myself. I write some poetry. I'm not as talented of a writer, but I do like writing poetry. And something I would like to ask you guys is, do you guys experience writer's block, or how do you navigate that, or any advice, anything on that topic? Because yeah, you guys seem to have a lot of inspiration to draw from. So
Yeah, I myself am actually just coming out of a bout of writer's block myself, and some of it is not just a lack of inspiration, but combined with a lack of time. And I can excuse my lack of inspiration, like, oh, I don't have time to write, I don't have time to write, when really I just can't think of something to write. But one thing that I remember really helping me, especially when I was writing the story for Novelly, was actually keeping a journal. And every 2 or 3 days, I think my schedule was Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I would stay up at like 8 o'clock and I would write a page in that journal. And it would just be about something random. It would be a free write, or I would have something in mind that I wanted to write about, and I would just write a page on it. And then at the bottom, I would have notes and how it would continue from there. So I think that definitely really helped me. It kept myself really creative all the time. And sometimes, some days I would, I would forget, and then I would have to catch up the next few days, and I would feel really hard on myself, right, if I didn't catch up. And I think that it really helped. And I think I'm on like 250 pages now, ever since I started that, doing it 3 times a week. So it's helpful.
I would say I get writer's block pretty frequently. And I think, you kind of just touched on this. Like sometimes I can't tell if it's, do I have no ideas, or am I just preoccupied with other stuff and like not giving myself time to write? Like I know right now, I think I mentioned earlier, like AP exams, we're kind of in the thick of it. And I think I haven't written in a hot second. And that's something where I don't know if I just don't have the time or if I just don't have any ideas right now. But I think that's something where I will often try, if I'm not feeling super creative, I'll still try and write with some sort. Like I'm really into, I'm pretty involved in journalism. And so I will try and like, okay, if I'm not feeling creative enough to write a poem or a short story, can I write an article? Is there like an op-ed I can work on? Is there some other piece, just because I really enjoy writing and I think it's really cathartic? But just sometimes I feel like I don't have an idea I want to pursue creatively yet.
For both writing stories and then also like composing music, like my way of like handling writer's block is like I'll write out an idea, and then if I can't think of anything else, I'll leave it alone for like weeks. Don't tell anybody, but I've forgotten a lot of things that I've been composing because I've forgotten about it for like weeks. But I think this whole like writing out of order, like not doing it chronologically, because that's how I used to write. I used to write very linearly, and I feel like writing not that way is like a very like helpful tool to like get out of writer's block, because it's just like, yeah, I can't find anything to like piece this scene and this scene together, but hey, I know what I already want to write for that scene all the way over there. So like I feel like doing just different, like Aluni was saying, just like free writing and doing different things, like definitely help with writer's block.
Yeah, I think all of you kind of touched on what is like the most universal piece of writing advice, which is just to write something, which is always better than not writing anything. I think a lot of people who write kind of have a habit of like, oh, there's a whole thing in my head and it's just not on paper. And once you get something down, it's something that you can work with. And actually, Mina, you mentioned that you do like music and composition, and then you mentioned earlier as well that you like think very musically in terms of your character. So I was wondering, like, if you guys do any other art, or if you sort of like draw on any other art forms when you're creating your stories, and like, you know, if you think of writing as like a form of artistic response. Anyone go ahead, feel free. Sorry, it's a big question. But I mean, like, even if you have like character playlists or something like that, I always find it interesting to see how people like imagine their characters.
I definitely do character playlists. I also sometimes like if I'm working on something, it's in the beginning stages and I don't really know like where the character is going to go. I have a friend who sometimes I'll send like a paragraph to, and I'll be like, whatever, my little character descriptions, and I'll ask them to send back like a Pinterest board of like the vibe that they're getting. And sometimes it's great, I'll get extra ideas, and sometimes I'll be like, that is not what I want this character to be like at all. So I clearly need to like do some editing on my end. And that's a fun way to just kind of like almost like take a break from my characters. Like if they're kind of annoying me or stressing me out, I can kind of like remove myself and just look on Spotify or look on Pinterest. But I don't know, I think it's a fun way to just kind of like see if what is in my head is translating onto the paper well.
Yeah, I guess I'm just like really connected because just I'm double majoring in both music composition and creative writing, but like I do like doing like creating like something that me and my roommate found out was like really fun to do was create our characters on Artbreeder. Like that's just like really fun. So then you get like actually like see your character come to life. So that's just another thing like I do just to like like gain inspiration from like other art forms and stuff.
Yeah, I don't really. I guess I'm mono-artistic. I don't really do all that much outside of writing. I did used to play a lot of band music, but I don't really do that all that much anymore. I might pick up my clarinet once in a while, but I don't really do all that much.
And okay, I have like another question just out of curiosity, but like when you guys are creating your characters, do you imagine, does your story kind of come from your characters and sort of thinking about what your characters would do? Or do you think you sort of have like, you create people who would move through the story in the way that you want them to in order to get your message across? Like, what do you think comes first when you're writing?
I'd say it's kind of like a flip of a coin type thing. Like the story that I wrote for Novelly, it was character first, story later, I feel kind of thing. But for like a story that I'm currently writing now, like the idea came from like a random dream that I had from like somebody stealing my meal ticket at college. So like it was setting first, characters later. So it's kind of just like a 50-50 thing.
Yeah, I would say it's usually mostly like story. The story comes first, and then I kind of like model shove my characters around to fit how I want them to be. And if like, I don't know, I always hear people say a lot that like they let their characters guide them places, and I don't really feel that as much. I'm more of my story, takes precedence over whatever the character wants to do. And maybe that means I just need to change the character or something like that, but that doesn't mean I'm going to like let the character dictate the story most of the time. Maybe I'm weird.
Yeah, I feel like it really depends on the story for me too. I went through a phase where I would like write the ending first. That was like a 6-month phase, which I'm no longer in. But I think like that was something where that was definitely just like whatever I wanted the readers to take away from. The plot would come first and like everything else would be shaped by that. I think sometimes I'll write stories like if I have a friend who I feel like, I don't know, I'll like write a story kind of based on them and just put them in like a different world or a different scene where I think they would be happier. Then it's character first. I don't know. I think it really depends. But definitely I kind of do it in periods. Like I'll be in a place where like I really like writing character first, then I really like plot first. Just like depends on how I'm feeling.
There's a question in the chat that I wanted to pass on and add to. So Noreen wanted to know, when did you all start writing? And I wanted to add to that and ask, so when did you start writing? And then also, what advice do you wish you could give yourself in that moment? Because I know we have a lot of young writers who are starting out, like, I don't know, 13, 12, 15, like pretty young. And that's a question I get from them a lot. Like, what advice can you give me specifically? So two-parter. When did you start writing? And then what advice would you give that person, that young person?
I'll go ahead and start first. So what happened with me was that my dad, I used to have very bad handwriting. So my dad, to get me to better my handwriting, would give me a prompt and have me write stories, handwritten all the time. And they would be like a page long. And it would be about like something about like people on Jupiter, or, you know, meeting a dog for the first time. And that's kind of where I started. And apparently they were good for an 8-year-old. And then later on, you know, I would, whenever we'd have like a creative writing task for like an English class, you know, I would always really enjoy those and be like, oh, maybe I could do something outside of this. And it's kind of grown to the point that, you know, I look forward to English assignments now, which was not the case when I was 10 years old. So
I would say I started writing. I always really liked writing, but I think in terms of like doing it on my own, not because of a prompt, would be maybe when I was like 10. I remember we had my history teacher, we had to make a myth, like make up a myth, and write its whole backstory and all of its lore. And I chose like why the wolf howls at the moon. And that was something I had so much fun with it. And I still have it in my room because like it's not great writing because I was 10, but it was just more, I feel like I just had a lot of fun with it. And I wrote like 4 pages and like, I don't know, I really enjoyed it. And that was kind of the first time that outside of an assignment, or like I went above and beyond on a writing assignment. And then from there on, I started just like writing short stories whenever I was really upset about something. I would say that I think something like, and I think I still struggle with this, but it's like, especially when I was starting out, I thought everything I had to write was like profound, and like none of it was. And even to this day, still 95% of the stuff I write is bad, and like that's okay. And writing, I think, should be fun above all else. But I feel like sometimes, even now, I'll be writing something and like I'm not enjoying it. And it's not just that it's not a fun story. Like even if you're writing a really tragic story, I think you should still be happy you're writing it. And I think sometimes I'll be writing a story that's supposed to be so fun. And it's like, I hate this story. Like, I don't like it. I'm trying to write about something I don't really care about or something I'm not. And I think just like giving yourself permission that even if it's not great, like have fun with it. It doesn't need to be the most poetic, wise thing you've ever thought of. It doesn't need to be like the authors or like your friends that like you look up to their writing. It can just be your own. You can edit and revise it later to make it better. You don't have to. You don't need to be perfect. And like it's better to just have fun writing, I think, than to spend years and years on something and not enjoy it and then come up with like a beautiful sentence.
I'd say like I first started like writing like real stories, like paper or like computer document, was like 3rd grade. If anybody who's watching or like anybody on the chat who's from Miami, they would know about like the La Plume writing contest. That's where a lot of my stories like went, like just to see if I would win. Never did, but it was still like a really fun experience just to like write, because like I was like showing people like, hey, I can do this thing type thing. And I was like already doing it like verbally. I remember this one story where it was just about a really unlucky leprechaun who found a 4-leaf clover, and I got one of those like little echoey microphones as like the prize for that. But like, yeah, and then just, what was the other question? It was just like what advice would I give myself? As a first draft, run-on sentences are fine. As a first draft, run-on sentences are fine. It's just word vomit. Just put it on the page and don't forget anything, and then go back and look at it later and put punctuation.
Okay, I have a follow-up question and it's for everyone. So I am like just feeling very impressed with the confidence that you're projecting. And I'm interested in like how did you, because another thing I hear from a lot of young authors and like I've lots of adult authors too, is just this feeling that just that sense of self-doubt and feeling like you can't do it and you're not good enough. And I'm wondering I'm guessing, hopefully, you're not all superheroes. You probably have that voice too. So I'm just wondering, like, how did you learn or develop the confidence that I'm reading off of you? And yeah, tell us your secrets. No one's confident anymore. Interesting.
I feel like, okay, definitely part of it is I think I'm a lot more confident talking about writing that I've done a while ago, because if people don't like it, I can be like, oh, that was a year ago. Like I've changed. I think definitely like I still struggle with confidence, especially because I know like at least for me, something I do or spend a lot of time on is like my school is a competitive poetry team, which is really fun. And I've done it for the past few years and like I love it and we compete and it's great. But there are people on that team who like will have a 5-minute free write and I have like a few scraps and they have the most insane poem you've ever heard. They're already ready to perform it and then we go to competition and they're getting like tens across the board, perfect scores, like breaking world records. And I'm on the same team as them. And I'm like, okay, well, I have to go up after that. Great. And it's like they're amazing. And it's I think really hard to not feel inferior. And I think in writing, I feel the same way too sometimes. And I think that at a certain point, I think that's unavoidable. Like, I think it's human nature to compare ourselves to others. But I think for me, I just try and go off of like, if you ask a room full of people like their favorite author or like their favorite song, movie, actress, whatever, you're going to get 101 different answers. And I try and think of that in the same way about like my writing in terms of, yeah, this might not be the most universal thing that everyone loves and everyone adores, but it might help someone and some people might like it. Some people have like there's 8 billion, 9 billion people on the earth. Like someone's gonna like it. It's gonna resonate with someone. So I think I just try and go with like, this is the best writing I've done to this point. And I just try and ignore the voice that's screaming like, okay, but what about the person next to you's writing? Because someone's always going to do something better than you. And it's like just finding a way to appreciate their work without constantly comparing it to yours and downplaying your own successes.
For me, both of my degrees are just here's a suggestion. If you don't like it, don't take it. But if you're okay with it, vibe type thing. So it's always just like a throw up in like a throw up in the air of like whether like it lands with your audience. So it's kind of just like a thing where it's like you have to like be okay with what you're doing, like, and then also if you aren't okay with what you're doing, you also have to like accept that there are people out there who are also not going to be okay with what you're doing but also may love what you're doing. And because like there are times where I'm like people are like, oh my god, I love your writing, and I'm just like, you do? Why? So it's just like you kind of just have to like go with the flow of things type of way.
I also liked what you said earlier about how you were submitting to that contest just for fun, like just to see what would happen. And I think that's like a type of confidence too. Just like, I'll put it out there. I'm having fun, like, because I would have definitely approached that a different way when I was in the 3rd grade with a lot more like not such a positive attitude. I'm impressed is what I'm saying. That's all. Anyone else?
So I don't have confidence. I am just saying whatever comes to mind because I love writing. I love talking about writing. I think something really cool about what I got to do with Novelly was talking to an actual author, and and then I went to a local like authors not convention, but it was like they were like at booths and they were selling things, and I was volunteering them, helping set up their booths and talking to them. And I think just talking about writing and having that experience talking about writing is also just helpful. I think that really helped me, especially with my creative writing class. It's just getting used to it, getting used to talking about it, and help pretending that the audience doesn't exist is also pretty helpful.
I would also be interested in hearing from our hosts. I know you weren't anticipating like answering any questions, but I just think that this is good advice for the young people who are watching, like, because I know I've had the experience of watching people talk and thinking exactly what you've been saying, which is that, wow, they've got it all together. Like, I'm not as good as they are, but I love getting a window into like the insight that, here's how they're doing it.
Yeah, I wouldn't describe myself as a very confident person either, but I think it does like a little bit. It does develop the more that you put yourself out there, regardless of what happens, like regardless of if you're, winning competitions or like, or you're not winning competitions, just like putting yourself out there, having people see your work, it does build your confidence to an extent. And also I think like confidence it comes naturally. Like I think the most important thing is just to like follow what you love. And I think this is stuff that's like been touched on earlier as well, but like sort of just like chase what you love doing, and like every part of it is not going to be great, but I think if you just really really enjoy something, then don't give up on it because you don't think that you're good enough, because the point of it then is not for you to be good, it's to bring you joy and to like enrich your own life. Like writing doesn't necessarily have to address all these big profound issues, like you could just do it for fun. And I think that confidence will just sort of like along your journey develop kind of naturally. But like also just like try and put yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone. Because I mean, when I started high school, I was like the shyest person. And so a little by little, just like putting yourself in situations where you're just like slightly uncomfortable, it really helps you build that sense of self-confidence, because it's like, I said something weird and the world like didn't explode, like it's gonna be fine, and now I'm like okay. And yeah, just sort of chase discomfort and do what you love.
Yeah, and in terms of confidence, it doesn't only have to relate to writing. I think, especially for myself, I've struggled with confidence the entirety of my life. I still struggle with confidence to this day. I'm like the most insecure person of all time, yet I always put myself out there. So, and as a writer myself, or trying to become a writer, something that actually happened pretty recently. So, a few months ago, I was trying to publish my work for the first time, and I was working on a few pieces, and then I got my first ever rejection, and that was a huge like confidence kick. Even though I know rejection is part of the process a lot, I've heard from several writers that you're going to get a lot of rejections. That just hurt my self-esteem, and then I decided to submit to one other place that same day, just why not? And then I found out last week that I actually did get accepted into that one, so I'm getting my first piece published. So in general, just even if you don't feel confident in your writing, and even if a lot of circumstances arise that make you feel like you're not a good writer, or just in general, like in life, if you get a bunch of these boundaries that make you feel like you're not good enough for whatever reason, continue to go, because what your mind tells you, oftentimes that self-doubt, that little voice, everyone has it. You don't necessarily have to listen to it, and it's not necessarily true at all most of the time. So I'm very happy that I submitted it that day, because had I not, I would have never gotten my first official published piece, which is coming out, I think, next week. So yeah, just continue to put yourself out there. And even if you still have that negative voice, which you will, because everyone does, just ignore it and surround yourself with positive people. Just like, it's easier said than done. And then also one last thing about this topic in general about confidence, which I don't think is discussed enough just because of how society is, and it's something that I'm very passionate about, is if you do struggle a lot with self-doubt and negative voices and just this type of insecurity, if you have the resources to, please get help. There are people that will help you. There are people you can talk to. There's resources, and even though there can be stigma in certain environments, trust me, I know, like I'm in a very conservative environment where we're taught that like mental illness and mental health isn't real and you shouldn't be getting help for these types of things. But if you can, please do, because it can be extremely beneficial if you do struggle a lot with your confidence, because some people do need that extra help and some people don't, and some people have the resources, and unfortunately it's not as accessible to everyone. But yeah, that was my little, talk about that.
Okay. We have probably what's going to be our last question from the chat, which is, what do you guys do when no one reads your stories? And I think this is true. Like if you're a young author and you're just getting started, it's very hard to find an audience or like a writing community that's willing to do that. So I was wondering how you guys found an audience or how you guys would deal with not having one.
I personally would just say write another story and keep on going, because there's going to be times when people aren't going to want to read a story, or if you publish a book, people aren't going to buy the book. And sometimes that's because it didn't get out at the right time, it didn't reach the right people in the right ways, and sometimes it could be because you didn't promote it enough. But I think there's only a certain amount when you can blame yourself to the point where you just can't really, it puts too much blame on yourself and you're not, there's other factors at play. So I just wouldn't really attribute it much to how good or bad that you're doing. I think you just need to keep on moving on. It's important.
I've never really like thought about that. Like before Novelly, like I just wrote stories to write stories. I wasn't really expecting anybody else to read them. I would submit them to like that aforementioned contest because like first prize you got your book published, but like after a few years of not winning, I just never really expected to win. So it was never really a thing of what do I do when people don't read my stories? It's kind of a thing of what do I do when people like start reading my stories? Like I know I'm not gonna be famous, but it's just like, oh, now I have like a little fan base type thing. And it's just like unexpected because like a thing that used to just be a thing I did in my free time is now being like shown to other people. And I've like, now you just have to like, it's back to that like confidence thing. You just have to now just be cool with it and not worry too much about what other people think.
Yeah, I think that I never really, I think, let me try and get my thoughts together here. I would say I think that I didn't really even like ever consider people reading my stories for a while, but I would say don't underestimate like the people that do want to read your stories. It can be hard to ask, but I think you'll be surprised if you reach out and just ask like 5 friends, just like, hey, like I wrote something, if you'd be down to read it. At least one, if not all of them, are going to be like, oh my gosh, yeah, because people love you and people want to see your work and people want to read a good story. And especially if you aren't asking for feedback, like you literally just want them to read it, to get it out there. That's what, 20 minutes of their day. I think people will do that. If you have teachers, like maybe an English teacher who you really like, I imagine they would be down to read it. There's like a creative writing club at your school, like join that and ask to read something. I think people really want to read stories, and if asked, would love to. And I think just sometimes you have to be the one to ask, which is scary, but I think really rewarding if you end up getting the audience that you want.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I definitely agree that just like getting, you know, like a friend or a parent or a teacher to read your story can be great. And actually they provide, I think, some of the best feedback because they kind of know where you're coming from, more than, you know, somebody else would, like a stranger would. And so yeah, if you're looking for feedback, there's a lot of places to get it, but it's also not something that you need as a writer to be successful. And so with that, we close this very insightful and wonderful discussion. And just wanted to say that if anyone was wanting to check out the works of these wonderful authors that they've published on Novelly, they're totally free to read online. They're really good. I've read them all. I think about them all the time. They live right, I must say. And yeah, so all totally free to read on novelly.com. And if you guys, because I know it's been a little while since you published with us, have anything else that you want to plug, this is your time to do so, what you've been working on since you published. Okay. Well, they have their Novelly stories, great reads. I know that I'm like campaigning really hard for them, but they are fantastic. So
And I just want to say thank you to Novelly for bringing such amazing hosts and guests. This is one of the easiest webcasts I've ever been a part of because I just literally got to listen to everybody else talk. And I feel like as like a member of your audience, I'm feeling pretty inspired to, like, I'm legit feeling inspired. I'm not just saying that, to like go back to my own writing, which I think is really high compliment. Check out the links are below the video. And I guess that's it. I never know how to end things. Just like